So hi everyone, I'm Elnaz Yazdani. I'm from Woven in Kirklees and I'm the project manager for Growing Colour Together, which is one of our projects. Thank you for joining us last week. If you joined us for Mariana and Jeanette's talk, it was fantastic. It was just very fruitful. We learned about both their practices and kind of how they work with natural dyes. And today we have two more very exciting speakers, Cara and Hannah, who I'll be introducing in a bit. But first of all, just to give you a little bit of background about Woven in Kirklees. So Woven in Kirklees is a festival, it's a textile festival celebrating the innovation of textiles across our Kirklees area. And it's a biennial festival, so it happens every 2 years. However, we often have activity happening throughout the year with our partners. So we're funded through Kirklees Council. But we are now on the run-up to the 2023 festival, which is the 3rd of June to the 9th of July. So if you'd like to write those dates down, that's when our communities are going to be coming together and all of our projects will be showcased and have lots of different events on during that festival period. So as I've said, Growing Colour Together is just one of Woven's projects. So if you'd like to find out about other projects we've got going on, you can go on our website. Growing Colour Together is basically, in very simple terms, it's a project about using plants or growing plants and using them to create colour on textiles or on cloth. And it's a community project, and we've been funded by Arts Council England to work with a series of artists and community groups across the Kirklees area. Okay, so it's a project about growing and making textiles and sharing and learning together. So we're sharing that knowledge around natural dyes and sustainability. And we're on the run up to try and turn Kirklees into one big natural dye garden for the 2023 festival. So we do have hopefully we'll have a map of all these dye gardens because we've got a lot going on. Sometimes I'm like, oh, there's a dye garden there, a dye garden there. But we've got loads of events that have just been launched as well to help the community with their dye gardens. So we've got plant and seed swap sessions coming up so people can kind of swap and share what they're doing. It's on the 1st of April. I'll put all this in the chat later. We've also got a session on growing colour gardens, so actually how to grow a colour garden. And we've got a practical hands-on gardening workshop as well, coming up with Growing Works, which are based in Huddersfield. We've got lots happening. And we've got artists working in the community, some of which are here today, 7 artists. They're on a residency with us, so we're supporting them to develop their practice, while also they're then supporting the community and engaging the community with learning these skills to improve and think about textiles and sustainability on a local level that will hopefully have a bit of an impact at a bigger scale eventually. So we'll see. I just quickly just wanted to note one more thing. Okay, so yeah, so as I've said, as part of this project, we've got a series of talks happening. So these talks are from international, national and local artists, designers and organisations who are all working with natural dyes. So that's the common theme here. So as I've said, some of these where consented will be recorded, so they'll be on the project page, so you can catch up with some of the other ones where we don't have consent to record. I'm afraid these are just the live events. Okay. So yeah, so that's a kind of overview of Woven, Growing Colour Together, and why we're doing this whole project. I'd like to hand over to Rowan now. So as we've said, the University of Huddersfield is a partner of Woven, so they're very much heavily involved in this project. And I'd like to hand over to Dr. Rowan Bailey from the University of Huddersfield so she can tell you about her role and how she's involved with this project.
Thank you, Elnaz. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I'm Dr. Rowan Bailey. I'm the Director of Enterprise and Knowledge Exchange here in the School of Arts and Humanities at the University of Huddersfield. And also a director of a research centre called the Centre for Cultural Ecologies in Art, Design and Architecture. And I'm really happy to be part of this co-hosted event. As a School of Arts and Humanities, we've collaborated with Woven in Kirklees over over the last few years, and we're really happy to be working with them on the Growing Colour Together project, particularly because one of the things that we're very interested in as a School of Arts and Humanities is place-based working in collaboration. So we're really interested in the contributions we might make as a university to the kind of cultural life, energy and vibrancy of a place like Kirklees. If you're not from Kirklees, you must come and visit us, and you must come to Huddersfield, and you must come to this festival, because it's a really unique set of approaches to working with communities, doing good, ethically grounded, place-based working. And so I'm just a real advocate for that kind of stuff, and really glad you can all be with us this evening to hear these wonderful speakers, and hopefully we can generate some really interesting conversations after the talks. Okay, thanks, Elnaz.
No problem. So I don't know if I've already said this, but questions tonight, I think Lauren's reminded you, if you have any questions, please make sure you direct them to her in the chat. We'll have time for questions from the audience towards the end. So what we'll do is we'll do like we did last week. We'll open it out to the floor and we can put some audience questions to Cara and Hannah. So there'll be plenty of time. We're now going to introduce our first speaker, who is Cara Piazza. And I'm just going to, her talk is called Alchemy Meets Industry. So to scale or not to scale natural dyes. And Cara Piazza is a natural dyer and artisan based in New York City. She creates one-of-a-kind textiles only using natural dye stuff such as botanicals, plants, plant matter, minerals, non-toxic metals and food waste. And her fabrics are treated through alchemy dye sessions such as ancient shibori techniques, bundle dyeing, and these transform each textile into its very own story. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Cara. I'll unmute you, Cara, and spotlight you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm very excited to be a part of this talk and project. I think what you are doing is really exciting. And I think that actually like part of my talk, as I will launch into in a minute, is about kind of creating these systems where I think it's like beautiful to work on the macro to micro. So the macro is obviously like us being able to be interconnected through the internet, which is such an amazing thing that's like happened, is that, you know, we can kind of share all of these principles globally. Yeah, so with further ado, thank you so much for the introduction, and I will share my presentation. So let's just do this right now. Okay, can everyone see that? Yeah, thumbs up. Okay, great. So yeah, so as a natural dyer, and you know, I'm sure we have a lot of natural dyers in the audience here today. I think, you know, it's kind of crazy to think about the concept of scaling natural dyes at an industry level. And I kind of want to start my talk with saying that we shouldn't, and I will launch into why as we go on. I think that there are a lot of different ways we can actually look at the concept of scaling, and figuring out ways to kind of do this at the place-based, multi-local level. So I'll kind of continue with that as we go along. So yeah, so natural dyes to scale versus multi-local systems. That is me, Cara Piazza. I really believe in creating interconnecting networks. So I think that, you know, one of the things that I will talk about is how, you know, what's right for something in New York, like a dye garden in New York, isn't going to be the same thing that's right for a dye garden in Huddersfield, right? So it's about how do we kind of share information and knowledge in a way that actually invigorates where we are and really like works with the uniqueness of place. And I think that that's actually like a really beautiful analogy to how natural dyes work as well. There's so many different variations of how color can be created from just one dye stuff. So like just being able to like work with our differences, I think is a really beautiful way to kind of look at creating these dye gardens and creating our businesses and practices. So yeah, it's one of my things. A little bit about myself. I run a small scale natural dye studio in Brooklyn, New York City, and I work with different designers, artists, interior designers to naturally dye their collections for them. So what that means is I do everything from hand dyeing to solid dyeing. We can do tie-dye, ombre. I also create digital prints. One of the things that when I first started was like, I'll never do a digital print. Like, it's toxic, blah, blah, blah. And then I actually talked to a sustainability expert and they were like, digital prints actually don't use water. And I said, oh, that's something we also have to think about. So like sustainability doesn't have a Band-Aid to fix it, right? Like, it's like we have to, like, I think sometimes we can get caught up in purism and, you know, like solutions being 100% when like actually like on an industrial scale, naturally dyeing an entire collection, and I'll go into this, could endanger an entire species of plant if a company like a Nike would do that, right? Because they own the market share of everything. So it's really important to kind of think about not putting a holistic, sustainable solution into a broken capitalist system, because it would actually, it's just kind of like fighting fire with fire, right? It's like pouring gasoline on gasoline. So I think that that's something to kind of be mindful of as we kind of explore different sustainable solutions in regards to natural dyes. So that's what I do. I also teach classes and workshops. I sell natural dye kits. I give talks like this. These are some examples of the things that I do and I offer. So we create, sometimes I also work with the company Botanical Colors, which is an amazing natural dye provider in New York. I'm their creative ambassador and their production ambassador. So anything above, I would say 150 units, which to like one person is a lot, but to like a company is nothing, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. Botanical Colors is the production house for that. These are some garments that I bundle dyed for the company Mara Hoffman. We did, if I can remember correctly, 164 pieces by hand. So like you can do mini capsule collections of scale. Now, for two people naturally dyeing, that seems like a lot. But again, to a company like Mara Hoffman, which in the fashion industry is considered like an upper contemporary price point, which means that in US dollars, they range from $300 to about $900, is not a large order at all. So these are also things to think about when we're talking about what scale means. Like a scale, there are so many different price points of like units, whereas like, you know, a company like Nike or Everlane, for example, 1,000 pieces would be something. Sorry, of course you can hear New York City in my background. An ambulance had to go by at that very moment. But of course it's on my street. Oh my God, it's a nightmare. But yeah, so 1,000 units would actually be considered small to them, whereas to me, as a small scale dye house, that's a very large order. My God, I hope this goes away. I'm shut it in there in a second.
Hey, Cara, we actually can't hear it that much.
You can hear it. Okay,
No.
That's great. Thank you for letting me know. So these are antique linen pieces that I dyed for the company Samuel Snyder. So you can see you can actually get a pretty solid color when you're dyeing with natural dyes. For these, I only use natural dye extracts. So what that means is that the dye is in its most extracted form. It's not like a raw dye stuff that we're cooking out. So when working with extracts, you can actually scale in a little bit more of a holistic way. To the left is a digital print that I created for the company Jason Wu. And to the right is an ombre dyed garment that I dyed, oh my goodness, for a company that I just completely forgot the name for. And I'm going to go back and remember it in a second. I'm so sorry. This is like 6 years ago. But yeah, so you can see you can get a variety of different like techniques with natural dyes, and you can really kind of let your creativity go free while you're like creating these works for other people, if it is something that you are interested in doing as a career. Yeah, so these are some examples of samples that I've worked on, and different color creations for different companies. And this is a fun stained picture of working with my hands, which I invite you all to get messy and play with. Just like a brief, quick history of natural dyes. Applying color to cloth has been a way to mark ritual, identify belonging to a particular community, or to mark standing in cultures across the globe since antiquity. I think that that's something that's important to state, is that before the invention of synthetic dyes, certain cultures really individuated themselves with their cloth and with the natural dyes that they use, because certain dye plants were only available in certain areas. So like the Celts and the woad, right? Like that we all seen Braveheart with Mel Gibson with the blue face, right? That's what he was aiming for. So yeah, so certain cultures represented themselves with the natural dyes that were surrounding their communities. To create Tyrian purple, one needed over 70,000 mollusks to saturate enough color for one king's robe. That's like stating that certain colors indicated wealth and royalty due to the labor that it took to achieve them. Purple and gold were the colors of kings and royalty. So it's kind of interesting to also think about color, which we don't think about now, as like actually something that you might not have access to. Like, I think we might take for granted that like certain colors actually you can just have now because they're so ubiquitous with the synthetic dyes that we have. But with natural dyes, it actually like requires a lot of, as any natural dyer in the audience knows, a lot of labor and a lot of love and a lot of time. If you've ever been to one of my talks, you like, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but like time is one of the biggest ingredients with natural dyes that I think a lot of people forget. And I think it's like one of the most like beautiful parts of it. Like I always joke that like the things that I forget about and the things I leave the longest are always the most beautiful. It's like I'm just like the conduit and nature does its thing. But anytime I like rush or I'm like going really quickly, I'm like in New York, I'm like, I had to get it done yesterday. It obviously turns to, you know, poop. I won't say like a bad word, but you know, so I think it's important to like remember that like that kind of like access to certain colors you don't always need to have the color that you want in that moment, right? And for those of you who are growing garden like madder, you have to wait 3 years before you can even harvest it too. So it's like, it really is the labor of love that does connect you to place, because you got to stay with your garden. You can't really go anywhere if you want to harvest the goods, right? So yeah, so sorry to nerd out a little bit, but I think it's important to kind of know your history. Like synthetic dyes were invented in the 1860s by Sir William Perkins. It was actually an accident. And the first synthetic dye was the color mauve. And they were replaced with harsh chemicals and ones that required toxic metals to bind the cloth. And that's what we call mordants. Oh, okay, yeah. And it's hard to say when natural dyes first came into existence, but in terms of like historical records, we have records dating back to Pliny the Elder, which is kind of amazing. But there's also been like records like 6,000 years ago in Africa of like indigo pits and cloth. So like natural dyes are really like the story of our humanity. So since we've had plants and since we've been wearing clothes, we've colored them. Why natural dyes? The synthetic dye industry is one of the top leaders in polluting our world's water. Standard heavy metals to fix the color are not biodegradable and can take up to 300 years to fully disintegrate. Thus, it's killing all the ecosystems and drinking water where synthetic dye houses are located. It's also important to remember that they're actually a byproduct of the petrochemical industry. So they are directly linked to fossil fuels, if that is something that is important to you. So it's something to think about. Here's my next bit. Natural dyes are derived from plants, food waste byproducts, and animal-based dyes are a sustainable and holistic way to color cloth. They're slow, considered, and conscious. They create a story, imbue history, and transcend homogenous industry norms, bringing life and all fabric applications to while not polluting our planet. So I think it's also, you know, storytelling is a huge part of sustainability for me. I think that that's like oral tradition is something that I think we kind of like look away from, but a lot of natural dye knowledge was actually passed down orally. So it's kind of up to us to kind of continue telling that story. And like, that's the beauty. Like I always tell this like anecdote, but you know, I once had a client that I was just private label dyeing scarves for them, and they didn't communicate that they were naturally dyed to their store. And the store was like, ew, gross, throw these away, they're defunct, bye-bye. And I said, oh, well, did you, and then they came back to me and wanted to return them. I said, absolutely not. Like, did you tell them the story? Like, did you give them, and then they went back to their client, were like, oh, they were like hand dyed by like a baby witch in Brooklyn with like berries and whatever and blah, blah, blah. And they ordered 10 more. Nothing changed besides the story. So I invite you all to tell the story of these, to start shifting people like of natural dyes and of your products and of your work, because that's what people want to buy. And that's essentially what's going to help the sustainable movement keep it moving. Okay. Natural dyes also have a terroir like wine. Color grown all over the world possesses different characteristics that can cause a subtle nuance in the shade that they produce. Like I had mentioned before, if madder is grown in Huddersfield as opposed to California, the color is going to be a little bit different. But that's exciting, right? It's like kind of cool. We can use that to our advantage because we can kind of think about having these like specific products created that are like Cali based, UK based, Turkey based, you know, like that's something that you can actually use in your marketing campaigns, right? Like it's exclusive, which kind of like naughty to say, but like that's something to think about. It's like people want things that they feel like other people can't have. And with natural dyes, that's just a built-in fact. So why not explore? Many variables go into the extraction of a shade of color, which can seemingly be frustrating to begin with, but ultimately can be harnessed to your advantage. All the variables that go into changing the color of a natural dye are the temperature, the cooking time, if you're not using heat, the soil health, the pH balance, the metal of the pot, the time you harvested it. I forgot to include your mood that day. There's a whole variety of variables that go into making a natural dye. So these are all things to kind of consider, which might sound really daunting at the beginning, but I think as long as you're like a diligent note taker, you'll be able to recreate something similar to the first effect that you got, which is great. Sorry, I have to push my face out of the way. So how can we harness what is different to our advantage, right? Working with the specific characteristics of local industries, tastes, and cultures can lead to different exciting campaigns and projects. So how can we actually work with where we are to tell that story about what it is that we're doing and create these like multi-local systems? So Ezio Manzini is an Italian theorist and sustainable design academic. This is one of his quotes that I really love because it really highlights that the rediscovery of traditional craftsmanship is what's going to kind of lead us into this sustainable future. But it's about mixing it. There's like a hybrid, right? With high tech, with tech, with big, you know, with industry. It's about how do we create these systems, and into my next slide, I'll cover what he means by cosmopolitan localism, where it's like we create these networks that interconnect these different industrial standards, but we do it in a way that's holistic. So cosmopolitan localism is a theory that was created by a man named Wolfgang Sachs in the 70s, and it is basically what I'm just saying here. So we're working with a way to connect cities and frameworks and systems in a way that shares information, kind of like mycelium networks, if you think about it, right? It's like they all send out these little, like when one colony is not doing well, it sends out a message to another one and they share all the info. So it's like, how can we think in like mycelial network frames on a cosmopolitan level? To create these networks, right? So it's like, if you can, for anyone who knows what happened to New York during Hurricane Sandy, Con Ed, where we get our electricity from, got hit and it blew out the entire electrical grid in the lower Manhattan. if Con Ed had moved their power to multi-local, small, oh my God, I just forgot the word for a plant for plants, instead of having it concentrated in one area, that wouldn't happen because there would have been multiple backups. So just like your network of community gardens, how can they all help each other in a way that creates a resilient system instead of just, it's just, when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like if you put all of this stuff in one place that's going to help the rest of it, it's susceptible. Right. So it's like building resiliency is also by like embracing these like different systems and places where we're going to grow our gardens and we're going to dye our drops and do all these things. So yeah, so one of Wolfgang Sachs' quotes that I love is that after all, it is only from places that variety crops up because it is in places that people weave the present into their particular thread of history. So it's like that to me is just like this beautiful way of just like saying like embrace what you have around you. And like, you know, we see it in slow food movement, local farming, and now natural dyes, and also the concept of fiber sheds. Fiber sheds are incredible too. I think you guys have probably heard of fiber sheds, and if not, I can go into a little bit of that, but it's like working with people who grow basically all of their own yarn and wool within their watershed of where they live. So it's very sustainable because it's only in the watershed of where they are. So one of the things that I've been working on is trying to figure out ways to like retrofit synthetic dye houses to work with natural dyes. So I've partnered with different dye houses in New York City that use synthetic dyes, but to use natural dyes for certain larger projects. So here's an example of just like this is a reel I had on Instagram, but I think it's a nice way of seeing like a way that you can do it. And the machine in the background is something called a paddle dyer. So basically what happens is you mordant all your cloth. This is oak gall tannin that we're just straining out into the big boy. It fits this one fit 200 pounds of fabric. So that was approximately like, I think it was like 150 dresses. And then we poured in our madder that we cooked. So you can see the water is getting nice and pink. It's very hot and steamy in there. It is not glamorous. A dye house is not a glamorous place to be. So you all think like nice witchery? It is gross. This is a hydro extractor, so it spins out all the water. Then we're using dryers. That's nice. This is Erin, who's great. And this is what they all look like afterwards in my studio. So you can see, you can do mini scale. We like to keep it gentle over here. So these are some ideas I had. Also give me a time if I'm talking too much. Like, do I have about 10 minutes? We're good? Okay, cool. So some ideas for change, converting synthetic dye houses into natural dye houses, community dye baths. I'm going to show some examples of some companies that are doing some really great work in that department. Macro to micro, online and in-person workshops. I think the beauty of teaching online is that, you know, we can do things like this where I'm talking to most of you who are in the UK, and it really spreads the information really, really wild without, you know, concentrating it only to the place. So that's a way that we can kind of create these hybrids, right? Like it's like these online classes are helping people empower themselves where they are with what they have around them. Did I skip a slide? No, we're good. Okay, so companies like Nike, like I said before, sorry for repeating myself, but they sell, think about this, they sell 25, this might be like a little bit of a biffed fact here, I will say that a lot, but they claim that they sell 25 pairs of shoes a second. Imagine naturally dyeing 25 pairs of sneakers in a day. Like that is, the scale is crazy when you think about that, right? Like they have, I have friends who work there, so I can say this, they have entire departments dedicated to ensuring that they don't use up the market share of like the world's supply of organic cotton. Because if they were to like experiment with using organic cotton in like 1 year's worth of clothing, it'd be done. They'd use it all. They'd use the plant. So when you think about that kind of a scale, applying that to natural dyes isn't exactly, there isn't a match there. But what companies like Nike can do, because they have the framework and the infrastructure, is they can do small little drops of 1,000 units here, 1,000 units there. Maybe they have dyers based in Portland, Oregon, where they're based. Maybe they have them in New York. Maybe they have some in China. So it's like, how can they spread their production across different countries to create these kind of smaller sustainable solutions instead of making a homogenized campaign? So these are all just like, this is my dream. These are my pipe dreams, guys. None of this is happening, but people are working on it. So I'm just like throwing it out there. It's like, sometimes if you say it, it'll happen. So it's just like thinking about how companies can like work like that instead, you know? Yeah, so like, you know, companies, this might be kind of like a silly idea, but we're thinking like, you know, Supreme is a sneaker company, like a skateboard, like a cool kid. Imagine if natural dye drops happen the same way Supreme did their drops. They post something on the internet, it sells out in 5 seconds, but there's like one store you can go to in one place. This might also just be a pipe dream, right? But like, what if we could create these fun local ideas with natural dyes where it's just like, you get what you get, it's beautiful, you have your small collection, and that's what it is. And that's the story. And that's what we wrote. So on the right is an example of a class I taught. It wasn't even a class, it was more like a workshop where I had in an indigo vat, I had a ton of supply of flowers for bundle dyeing that were all harvested from a company called Garbage Goddess, which I'll talk about in a second. And people just brought their own clothes to upcycle them. And it was amazing. And we had like about 25 people. They came, they worked with the supplies. I was there giving them a little bit of guidance, but I didn't want to tell them too much of what to do. And they made these, I was like, I would sell this as though it was mine. I didn't touch a thing. That was all their work. So it's like, how can we like create events like this that kind of empower people to like do it themselves, you know? There's a company that I think is doing an amazing work. This is actually not naturally dyed, but I do think that this process could be something that would be really great for the natural dye community. They run something called a community dye bath. They're based in Los Angeles, and they have like 5 colors a month, and you just send your clothes in and they send them back to you dyed. So if they're stained, they're gross, whatever, you want to get the color. It's a great way to upcycle, and they're like diverting landfill, which is an awesome thing. They process 700 garments a month. That's a lot. That's a big number. So that's like cool to think about, that you can really like, that this is working, and it's a system that's working because they keep doing it and people love it. So it's, can this be applied to natural dyes? I don't know. I hope so. Even if it's not 700, but if you're doing it in your community, maybe you can do 50. You know, I have tons of dye baths that I feel so bad when I have to get rid of them. I can't freeze them all. So like I'll often like tell my friends to come bring their bed sheets. We'll choke up the vat, you know, stuff like that. Like, how can we like just keep repurposing waste in a way that's positive? These are the Kano dye pits in Nigeria. They're 500-year-old vats of indigo, and sadly, a lot of them went defunct because of the synthetic dye industry. But when you see these beautiful, like in-ground community works, like, are these options for us, like on a communal level? Can we build these into our spaces? Can we build these communally into our spaces, right? Like, these vats were given down by fathers to sons for like multiple generations, until like, I think in the 60s, they started seeing more of the synthetic dyes come in. And I'm sure like Hannah, you'll talk about this later, and like Teotihuacan, like there aren't that many natural dyers still, even in places like Mexico, right? Because like tourism comes in and people want things cheap and fast. So it's like, how can we like support these cottage industries in a way that kind of like combat the cost of what it costs to use natural dyes? These are all things to think about as well. So this is another one of Ezio Manzini's acronyms that I love. Small, local, open, and connected. And I think this just sums up everything that we've been talking about, right? So it's like keeping things small, keeping them local, but they're open and they're connected. I just repeated what's on the screen, but in this way, it's like, you know, that's the beauty of the internet. That's the beauty of the thing that's connecting us all, is it's like we can show each other what we're doing with this beautiful free resource, right? So it's like the information is open, but what we're doing physically is small and local. And how can we connect each other to all these different projects, right? Like, it's like, how can Grow in Color in the UK get connected to like the New York City community gardens and share information and, you know, create these networks and systems to just for us to all share. One of the ways I think that we could do that is through these classes. So workshops, teaching classes, hosting play sessions. These are some examples, sorry, like me teaching online in my cold studio a couple years ago. Yeah, so these are some examples of visuals of some classes that I've taught for bundle dyeing. This was a pandemic class in my like little apartment at the time. These are some small scale case studies. If anyone has read E.F. Shoemaker's Small is Beautiful, I think it's like such an amazing, I mean, it's like the Bible, right? Like that from the 70s. It's like, it's a little bit utopic, but it's like, it's the grounding for a lot of this, right? So it's like, if it's not, one of the things I love to say, because I kind of think it's true, it's not beautiful, it's not going to be sustainable, because then we're just going to flood the market with a bunch of ugly stuff. So it's like not to be afraid of things that are beautiful, and like that doesn't mean that it's not going to be sustainable and gorgeous. So just like kind of thinking about that as well. Talking quickly just about circular and vertically integrated businesses, I wanted to give a couple of examples of companies that are working with natural dyes in both of these ways, or composting and food waste and stuff like that. So circular business is a company, or it's a business that considers the afterlife of the product. So like what happens to the product when it goes defunct, and they typically will build that into their business. So some companies that are starting to retroactively do this are like Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, Mara Hoffman, because they're creating certain branches of their divisions where you can actually send back your clothing and then they repurpose them into something new. So they're doing take back programs. So that's something that's cool to think about. How do you build services into your business? Are you just a business that is a service? You don't always have to sell something. You could just sell an upcycling service. You don't have to sell a thing, right? So like that could be part of your process. You can sell education. You can sell frameworks for design. We don't want to create any multi-level marketing schemes here, people, but I'm just saying, like, these are all, that's how it starts, right? But we can facilitate is more of the way that I think we can think about it. Working with sustainable and renewable packaging. Does your packaging actually become something that's like a part of the product, which I think is like an interesting thing to think about. Like maybe the packaging is the product. Like, does it biodegrade? Can you work with seed paper? Is it compostable? Stuff to think about in that way. And then creating businesses that use waste as a resource. So Garbage Goddess is a company in New York City that does floral composting. So what they do is and they're so cute. This is them at the compost heap, but basically they break down massive floral events in New York City and they compost them, but then they also connect them to people like me. So everything you see here is me actually dyeing their overalls that they wear on the job with the waste that they've collected from these events, because the city has a lot of trash, and trash is another person's gold. So if this doesn't have to go to landfill, and you know, the demand is, there aren't enough natural dye like to be like really turning this into a dye business yet, but like I will take 9 garbage bags of flowers from one of their jobs and it will last me a year. That's crazy when you think about that. One job, and they're doing like 8 jobs a week. So all of that all those flowers could be something that could get repurposed and turned into dye. Think about all the food waste in the city that could get repurposed into dye, right? There's a lot of Mexican restaurants using avocados and juice bars using avocados, right? Think about all the avocado pits. I should have put this in the presentation, but Green Matters Natural Dye Company, which is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, partnered with Chipotle, the burrito place, and Chipotle was giving them avocado pits to dye their merchandise. So like these are all things that like can happen. Fragmentario is another natural dyer from New York. Maria, she works with avocados and does like the most amazing creations with avocados, just like everything from making bricks, like really turned one dye stuff into like a variety of like different applications, which is really cool to see. And then there's also the concept of vertical integration. So the company Older Brother, which is the photo in the right, they produce everything in Los Angeles and they dye everything in Los Angeles. So they own their own dye house. So that's another way to kind of create a sustainable natural dye business, is you're doing all of the dyeing yourself instead of shipping it out to somewhere that's cheaper, flying it back, and then you're not, the carbon footprint is quite high when you do something like that, right? So that's another like interesting way to think about it, is if you can kind of control the entire production of your piece, you're creating a more sustainable product that enters the marketplace. So yeah, that's older Brother US. These are some examples of what they do. So these are, and they also work with like repurposed textiles. So they're quite beautiful. It's like cool workwear, very pretty. And that is the end. That is my presentation for you. And I'm excited to hear all of your questions. I hope I said something interesting that inspired you or something, but I'm here, happy to hear what you all have to say. Thank you.
Oh, that was amazing, Cara. Thank you so much. I think I just made like about 5 pages of notes in the space of the last 40 minutes, because there was so much you brought up that's so relevant to what we've been looking at with our communities and what we've been thinking about. I mean, there was just some key things that I kind of pulled out from I loved what you said about connecting it like a mycelium network frames, when you connect, you know, thinking about that cosmopolitan localism, how can we kind of connect cities and networks and kind of share the knowledge of what we're doing. And there was, you know, just loads. I mean, there's comments coming through. Oh my God, that was so inspiring. There you go. So you've ticked quite a lot of people's interests of what we're thinking about. And just the idea of like community dye baths as well. That's not something we've ever thought about as a kind of, you know, with our artists working with communities. When we get these questions coming up, like, you know, everybody seems to be doing stuff quite with a small group, but how can we share that further? How can we take that further so that people can continue to sort of re-dye or you know, send things in to be dyed. I love that you talked about what you do with your dye bath at the end as well, and getting all your friends to come over to kind of put all their things that need dyeing in as well. And the acronym small, local, open and connected. Yeah, there was just so much. I could go on and on, but I can see questions coming through. So if you'd like to make sure you're directing your questions, there's some great quotes coming through. So thank you for those. I'll feed those back. But if you can direct your questions to Lauren, so she can kind of make a nice list of them for our artists at the end. Perfectly timed as well. Well done. So we've got plenty of time now for our second. So I'm going to hand over to Rowan to introduce our second speaker. Take your time, Hannah, as well. You've got plenty of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Cara. That was really, really inspiring. So I'm going to introduce Hannah Ross. So Hannah Ross is also known as Hanoux, and is an educator, an artist and clothing designer who's dedicated to only using regenerative materials. She defines Hanoux as a verb, to heal through the organic interplay of colour, shape, pattern and the cyclical rhythms of the natural world. Beautiful. Over to you, Hannah.
Great. Thank you so much, Rowan. Thank you for having me, and thank you so much, Cara. That was really an inspiring talk, and it's just so great to be here today and share a little bit about my process and journey. And everything that Cara laid out is so like present in my mind right now, and just how it's possible to integrate natural dyes into the industry. So I also took like 4 pages of notes, and I'm really excited to get into them into my own work and just figure out how to apply them. So yeah, my name is Hannah Ross, but I also go by Hanoux. It's my nickname of now almost like 10 years, and I've created a lot of different art under the name Hanoux over the years. And yeah, I just first started out this journey in dyeing, working a lot in synthetic dyes. I was working in costume in New York City, and working at the New York City Ballet costume shop, using a lot of amazing colors to dye tutus and dye fabrics and dye tights for the New York City Ballet for dancers. And it was one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. It was so incredible just to start with a small team to create everything start to finish. But the one thing, it was synthetic dyes, and that really wasn't good for me, good for the environment. I just knew I needed to change it. So I joined in the union, and there was this amazing group of women who were all about safety in the workplace, safety in the industry. And we actually shut down the laboratory. We decided that through like some study of the place, there's some study of the ventilation, that it just wasn't safe for me, it wasn't safe for anyone to work in there. And that really sparked my understanding. Like, if I wasn't being protected, who is being protected out there? And from that moment on, I decided all natural materials, and I really wanted to dive in to learn as much as I could about all natural products, applying them to textiles, but staying still true to one of a kind, very small scale, and applying it to all different mediums. So after that job, I decided to stick in costume and just apply all the natural materials. So I actually helped change like 3 different dye labs that were being used for costume and TV and film into all natural materials, down to the soaps, the fabric softeners, the spray paints. There's this amazing spray paint that's made out of sugar, just everything that was being used on set, we switched. And that made me realize that this is a need out there. And so at Silver Cup Studio and then 2 other studios, they made the commitment to go all natural. And that was a very inspiring moment for me. So I think now I will share also my presentation. I'm going to do a little screen share. Let's see. Here we are. Great. So 3 years ago, I moved upstate. I was also living in New York City, in Brooklyn, and I moved upstate New York to really focus on growing color. So I was really excited when I was invited to speak, because it's really what my focus has been the past couple of years. I'm living in Hudson, New York, and all around me, there are all these amazing businesses focused on agriculture, focused on farming, focused on growing like amazing food, raising great grass-fed meats. And so I couldn't imagine like a better place to be right now, just focused on like, how am I going to grow color? How am I going to find plants that have natural color? And conscious color is a word, a phrase that's been coming up a lot for me, of like why I'm doing what I'm doing and what I want to bring into the world through my art and creations. Just more consciousness around the fabrics, the material, everything that we're coming into contact with, and specifically color. So I'm gonna kind of skip through these slides because Cara so beautifully laid out why natural dyes. Like, it's a question that I do get a lot, actually. Why are you so focused? Why are you so in love with these natural dyes? And a lot of it boils down to water, fresh water. Synthetic dyes come from petroleum. It was a no-brainer for me when I really realized actually how much heavy metals were in my blood from working with synthetic dyes for like 5-6 years. The New York City Ballet they just didn't have the protection. And then it came down to my health. So it's a little bit of a personal story for me as well, because through this whole love of color, basically I was subject to, just these heavy metals. So, synthetic dyes are coming from cracking crude oil. They're not biodegradable, and natural dyes create a story, and they're from plants and they degrade back into the earth. And a lot of what I've come to find is that the waste from all the natural dyeing, it's actually regenerative and amazing for the soil. It's like complete opposite from what synthetic dyes offer. I have this little section in my garden, for example, that I'm pouring all of my leftover dye baths onto as an experiment of, is this going to grow better? Is this going to grow more strong? And of course, all the leftover indigo, the leftover madder root dye baths, those plants in that area where I've just been pouring the wastewater are like 3-4 times the height of the plants that I didn't give any of the wastewater to. So all of these little experiments, like these visual representations of the beauty of plant dyeing, is like what I'm really interested in right now. And it's just a little slide, just some photos of the lab. I also offer natural dyeing in my studio, and I have some different patterns that I offer: shibori, botanical printing, immersion dyeing, fat dyeing, where we're just dyeing like more solid colors. And this kind of has been a focus of mine just over the past like 3 or 4 years, specifically in Hudson, where there's a lot of small like local companies that want to take the leap into plant dyes. For example, the West Iconic Diner is this amazing restaurant, and they collected all of their plant scraps, all of their food waste over the past 6 months. And we did a collection of all their merchandise where they were like, okay, closed loop system. We want all of our hats and shirts and socks for this restaurant to be dyed with the materials that we are saving. It did take them about 6 months to get to this point, to have enough material for us to dye with. But I have found that being upstate in this smaller ecosystem has allowed me to, just as an individual artist, reach out to companies that are a little bit more local minded, a little bit more micro, having this like smaller perspective versus being in New York City, where things can get a little bit focused on production and just high quantity and making the most profit. So I do think that the focus of like starting a dye garden or starting a community dye bath in a smaller area that's maybe not a main city, but it's a suburb or a rural area outside of the main city is the way to go. I've just found such a like open arms being upstate New York with all of the dye processes versus like in New York City, there's a lot of steps to get to, or not steps, but a lot of like closed doors when it comes to production and when it comes to introducing natural dyes in certain ways. So a lot of my inspiration as an artist comes from Oaxaca, Mexico. After I decided I wasn't going to live in New York City anymore, I was going to figure out how to make a connection with some artisans and really learn the process of natural dyes. I decided to live in Oaxaca, Mexico. So I went there in 2018. I spent about 7 months learning with this group of artisans who live on a cochineal ranch in Oaxaca. And it was an amazing artist residency program where I was linked up with a master dyer. Manuel is basically a 4th generation cochineal farm outside of Oaxaca. And I quickly realized that this wasn't like a for-profit business for him anymore. He was doing it, purely out of the love of his heart, continuing to share education with local schools, grow the nopales cactus, and these little tiny insects that grow on the nopales cactus are the cochineal, and they create a brilliant red dye, which has been used in Central and South America for generations. And now it's really become a much smaller industry, where at one point cochineal was right up there with gold and silver as an export to Mexico. Now, it's a much smaller industry, but the 5 women that he employed in Oaxaca, we all became, great friends over the time. They have such a sense of like honor and value in their life, growing these plants, harvesting the cochineal. I just remember this one woman specifically, Mana, she would say, I am for these bugs. Like, I will wake up exactly at the sunrise in order to get the bugs when they don't have the dew on them, so they're dry and I can lay them out. Like, I could just see the beauty of their lifestyle being driven by the seasons and the cyclical nature of these bugs, of the nopales. And they were teaching that to their children. They would get them out of bed also at the crack of dawn and be like, no, we're going right now to harvest these bugs and turn them into the dye, because that's what our ancestors did, and our ancestors before that. And just imbued such a beautiful rhythm to their lives in a rural area in Mexico, where otherwise maybe they wouldn't have access to something that had such richness and such culture. So I've been working with a few families in Oaxaca, 4 specific families over the past couple years, helping them like develop more of a dye lab, more system to help them like do custom dyeing for different clients. And at first, when I was in Oaxaca my first year, I thought, oh, this is amazing. We'll build a centralized location and have a dye lab in Oaxaca, and it can offer large scale dyeing for maybe people in the United States, people in Europe, all over the world who would like a little bit of the special Oaxaca flair. Over the past couple of years, I realized that's not the way it's going to work. It's going to be a decentralized system. It's going to be small families in their home with their family, the way they have it set up. And like Cara was saying, I'm really interested in that. How are we going to connect designers and artists that want a little bit of amazing natural color from Oaxaca to these families? And what is the system that's going to bring their richness of culture, their richness of color, and their amazing techniques to different artisans? So I know that there are some wonderful designers and artists already out there doing that, but I also see still a need for so many different families in Oaxaca to, spread their craft, spread their natural dyeing, and find a way to share that knowledge with their children. So, for example, when I was in Oaxaca this past year, I was working for a client who was in London, and her naturally dyed dresses are produced in Oaxaca. I was helping them get the silk ready, get it all together, do all the dyeing. And the family had 3 children, and none of them were interested in the process at all. They're just kind of glued to their phones. And Moises and Gladys, the mother and father, were like, yeah, we're so scared actually of the future, because our children don't really want to interact with us in the same way that when I was a kid, I really wanted to interact with my mom and dad when they were doing the natural dyeing. And I learned so much just through seeing and talking with them and just being there with the process. So it just made me think, like, what is a new way to share to the next generation of this ancient craft, and what are like some new ways that we can think to, make it more fun, more appealing, more exciting for the next generation of, everyone really. And these families that have this craft imbued. So that was very interesting moment. And I think it is really just all about the storytelling. So let's see. So I have this Colors of Mexico book, and basically these are just some swatches that were dyed in the same bath. So we start up in the left-hand side, like Brazil wood is this amazing heartwood from Central and South America, and it takes sometimes up to 100 years to produce this brilliant shade of red. And these swatches were all from the same dye bath. On the left, we have some silk and wool, and on the right, we have all plant fibers. some cotton, some jute, some hemp. And this is a way I like to talk to some of my clients about natural color, like the difference that you're going to see on silks, the difference you're going to see on the cottons. And you can just see at the next one, we have a Brazil and marigold. It's a little combo. Purple onion skins are creating this beautiful green. And then we have a pericone, which is creating this beautiful yellow. And let's see, indigo. They're all laid out in the same manner, where we have the silks, usually a bit more a saturated color, and then we have the cellulose, it's usually a bit more muted. So these are a few projects that were completed. The top two were completed in Oaxaca. So this brilliant orange is some of the silks that we dyed together, me and this family, for this company in London called Super Nature. And it's a brilliant, it's like lightweight ahimsa silk that she uses for these gowns. And I help these artisans pull together all these colors. I'm also going to show you just a little slideshow of the family and their working environment and the just love of silk that they have. So for example, this beautiful dress, the company Super Nature, they really want to use silk that is local to Mexico. But there really isn't a silk that's produced in the Americas yet that is of this lightweight, that has like a dress-like weight to it. So this fabric is shipped from India to Mexico. And then in Mexico, all the dyeing happens, and then it's shipped back to London. And I love their company. I mean, the ethos is amazing. They're working with artisans all over the globe, but still the impact on the travel and the shipping here to there is, you know, it's definitely making a really large impact. But really opened my eyes to, know that not everything is going to be like fully sustainable. I think focusing on being 20% sustainable, 30% sustainable, and not focus on being 100% right now is like a really good place to start. Yeah, these are some other custom collaborations I've done, some wallpaper, some hand-dyed sneakers. And like Cara was mentioning in her presentation, all these custom clients were a very small run of plant-dyed creations that were mixing in with the much larger inventory that these companies sell. For example, the sneakers were with this company called Greats, and we made around 150 sneakers. And this is amazing, but the larger umbrella company for Greats is Steve Madden, and they're producing hundreds of thousands of sneakers. And when we produced, just around 150, this was just a small splash for them. And they really didn't so much care about the sales. It was all about the storytelling. It was all about coming to the studio, seeing the material, taking a video of me in the studio with my 2 interns, making it happen. And that was the most valuable part of it for them. And that was also very exciting to know, like, yes, it's about the product, but 100% it's about the storytelling and the materials and just educating people on, wow, plants can be purple too. Like, so many people were like, oh my gosh, how is this from a plant? It's purple. So this is a little overview of conscious color and where I'm at right now. I'm gonna exit out of here. So I was speaking all about Oaxaca as like one of the most inspiring places for me as an artist. This is Moises and Gladys. This is us creating our color palette for the designer out in London on this beautiful silk. And so Moises and Gladys live in the Sierra Norte Mountains. They are about 5 or 6 hours outside of Oaxaca, Mexico. And they have their own little dye lab in their house. where they're able to raise their children. Wait, here's their view from the dye lab. It's stunning. It's a really beautiful place. And the water that is coming out of the mountains is like the most pure. The pH is super neutral. It's just making all the colors super beautiful. And they've had a tradition of natural dyeing there for generations. And the one ask from the family was, can you help us get our system together? We've never written anything down. We've never weighed anything. We don't have really any sort of situation with the calculating. So that was an amazing journey to just mix a little bit of my, style, which comes from using stainless steel pots, non-reactive metals. So you have no spots, no stains. All of your natural dyeing is very clean, where their style is they use these big oyas. They're all just clay pots, and, a little bit of spots and mixtures are like coming through because they're using this natural material to dye in. And I was like, why don't we try a different pot? And they're like, no, like we have to dye in the clay pot. Like that is part of the tradition. So it's just a really beautiful mix of learning of like where they're coming from, why they're doing what they're doing. And the past couple of years, there was this amazing silk sanctuary built in this town where they live. So I was able to get this wonderful tour of the silk sanctuary and what they're doing there. I'm just going to give you this kind of informal tour of the sanctuary because it's this wonderful place that this is their outdoor sanctuary where they can wash things. They have a little gallery in front talking all about the different indigenous pueblos all throughout the Sierra Norte mountains that are having different materials. These are the pressure chambers where they keep the eggs for the silkworms. And everything was funded and donated by the state of Oaxaca and by the country of Mexico, because they're just like, this is we need to keep this alive. And these are the little silk cocoons. I'm sure that a lot of you in the audience know where silk comes from, but this is basically where the silk strands come from. They're taken out of these cocoons that the moths form after eating all of their mulberry leaves. And ahimsa or peace silk is a type of material that is created after the moth emerges from the cocoon. And you can see this tiny little hole. The moth has emerged, it's gone free. And then they take all of these cocoons, and this is an artisan in the sanctuary taking the cocoons, carding them together like you would a wool and spinning them back into a thread, which is much more labor intensive, but it is like the most ancient way of making silk, and it doesn't allow for any harm to these creatures. This is a photograph of one of the worms, the cocoons. This is one of their finished pieces. So they're not doing any dyeing at this facility. They partner with so many different dyers all over Oaxaca that have their little dye lab in their house with their family. And they have a collection of these beautiful pieces that are hand woven, hand stitched, and hand dyed, and all made of this beautiful silk, which is one of the only places in the Americas that's making silk in this centralized way, really. So this is Gladys and her son. This is a view of the sanctuary from the hill. And I just think it's a really good example of how we can mix, an ancient practice that artisans have been doing in this culture for generations and generations, but mixing in a little bit of, a modern building that's able to house infrastructure and just more resources and more appeal to fund and uplift what the artisans are doing here. So that is that. And then just wanted to show you this other picture of the cocoons. So there were some students in Mexico City that created these 3D like spiraling long tubes for all of the cocoons to attach to. Another way where there's a little bit of modern ingenuity mixing with this ancient craft, and with this like spiraling 3D printed apparatus, they're able to fit like 5 times more silk cocoons, and they have them all on these beautiful shelves. This is in Moises and Gladys's house. They hand painted the cycle of the silkworm, and their family just has such a focus on the silk, which is why I was working with them with 2 other designers that dye silk specifically. And yeah, they are quite the experts. These are all the little baby eggs. So my heart's so safe, but these are the tiny little eggs waiting to be incubated and turn into the silks. This is a view out into the Sierra Nortes. And this was 2 years ago. So this is actually an area where they were growing all of the mulberry trees for the silkworms to eat. And they sent me a picture recently, and the trees are already like 5 or 6 times the size. Yeah, and that's the last little picture of these silkworms. And then if there are some natural dyers out there, this is a photo of some cosmos, which grow wild in Mexico. They're amazing natural dye flower, which I am growing abundantly in my garden right now. And I imagine they'll be a part of Growing Color Together as well. It was just so amazing to see in Mexico all these natural dye plants that are actually just growing wild, like on the side of the street. We have all the cosmos and yeah, all these really wonderful plants. So I'm going to stop sharing. Great. Thank you for dealing with my screen sharing slideshow. I just felt it was really important to share a little bit about Oaxaca and what I'm looking to cultivate with Oaxaca, and my current place here in New York is just like some sort of reciprocity. And how am I going to give back to this amazing community where I learned so much? And at first, I really thought that was all about purchasing natural dyes from some local farmers and purchasing just bulk material, supporting them economically. So for the past like 4 years, I've been purchasing lots of different dyes from this amazing collective in Teotitlán de Valle, the BDAO collective. Happy to share their link if you are interested. There are like 30 to 40 different, mostly women, but there are some men as well. And they have this learning center in Teotitlán de Valle, which is a city outside of Oaxaca that has a huge history of weaving with wool, weaving rugs, natural dyeing, and they export so many amazing hand-woven rugs around the world. And like Cara had mentioned, actually, a lot of the dyeing that has been happening there slowly has been becoming more synthetic, and they use a lot of fiber reactive dyes on the rugs. Sometimes it's even hard to tell. I'll ask a vendor, an artisan, is this a natural dye? And they'll kind of go towards, oh, you know, it is natural. It's hard to say, you know, is it natural or not? There is a little bit of tricky situation because people want to make money off of this amazing art form. And so they're quick to say, oh yeah, it's a natural dye. But I sometimes know that maybe it's a turquoise, which is not really available in the natural dye world. So anyways, this amazing collective, they have an education center where they're hosting a lot of workshops around natural dyes, offering free classes to youth and local people of Oaxaca just to get them more activated and integrated with the natural dyes. And then they also source and sell dyes in bulk. So I've been purchasing some from them, and that has been wonderful. But another way that I want to kind of build the reciprocity is in education and hosting retreats and workshops that are one for people that are outside of Mexico that want to come and learn and get inspired and see the kind of amazing craft that's happening there. And two, offer free or really, really low price workshops and education modules for people that are local in Mexico and want to learn about this ancient craft. So I'm really excited to share just a little bit, but I will be hosting a retreat later in this year that is all about natural dyes in Mexico, and it will be just a tour around some different amazing artisans and just a deep dive all about craft and process. It'll be about a week long, and yeah, I'm excited to share more about that, but it will be able to share that very soon. And so switching gears, coming back to New York State, I wanted to share a little bit about this past year. I was staying in Hudson, and every weekend I was downtown Hudson popping up with a community dye bath. Like Cara was saying, this is an amazing way, I think, to bring people together around dyes and natural dyeing and recycling and saving stuff from the landfill. So I decided, okay, I'm going to give it a go. We need to start a community dye bath here in our little micro ecosystem of Hudson. So I partnered with this farm called Sunfair Farm. And every Saturday we popped up at this little farmer's market, and we had a community dye bath where people could drop off their clothes with me. I'd bring it to the studio, and we had a different color every month. We ran the program for 4 months, and it was amazing. We dyed almost 200 garments over the summer. Everyone had like a different kind of idea of what they wanted for their garment. So this is something I learned very quickly with this drop-off community dye bath program. Was people usually have a really strong connection to their clothing. So they're bringing this garment that they've held on to for maybe years. For some reason, they can't give it up. And so I ran into a little bit of an issue because every single person wanted something a little more special. They wanted, oh, I wanted this color or that color, which can be a little bit challenging with natural dyes. Even though I had the color of the month, people still have like such a connection to their garments. So this summer, I'm changing the model, and there will be 2 events every month where people can come to my studio, and we're going to dye everything there together, one pot, people coming together with one color. You bring the garments, and the beginning process will be the washing, the mordanting, preparing everyone's garments, and then everyone will get the hands-on experience of putting them in the pot themselves. So if you are an individual natural dyer out there and you're really interested in starting the community dye bath, I would suggest just being really clear and really specific on what you can offer and what the garment is going to change into when it's handed over to you. Because people have an idea of what dyeing is, and a lot of it is based in synthetic dyes. A lot of it is based in this like unlimited, unnatural range of color that we always have access to through Photoshop or through the digital world. And so sometimes it got a little sticky. I would give someone's garment back, and it, I thought it was beautiful, but they'd be like, oh, I really wish it was a bright purple. And I'm like, well, you gave me a very like lightweight cotton tunic, which can be very challenging to bring a really deep shade to. So I think it's important just to really explain more storytelling, more understanding of the dye process, that it's very unexpected, and to release control. Yeah, it's just something I'm working on as an artist right now. And how can we have that dialogue with our clients, with people that want to dive into natural dyeing? How do we share that it's not perfect, and to embrace the blemishes, to embrace the muted tones, and to embrace this kind of like earth-like essence, which has almost been erased from our clothing very specifically. I mean, clothing has solid, bright colors that people just really become accustomed to. So yes to the community dye bath. I think that this is an amazing idea. I mean, woven, Kirklees, I think, yes, make it happen, but also maybe include some in-person dye baths so people can understand the process more and get their hands dirty, because the drop off, I think what Cara brought up with this company that's doing it with the synthetic dyes, it works super well because you can say, this is the color it's going to be, and it returns to you that color. But for example, yeah, I mean, I'm repeating myself, but with the natural dyeing, people can have some underarm stains, like I have some right now, that can like change and shift according to what the pH of the dye bath is, or if you're trying to do a light over dye, it might kind of make the underarm stains like more orange. So there's just like some finessing to really work out with the community dye bath that I got to do this past summer, which was actually really fun and inspiring to see how people react. Yeah, and I just definitely love the idea of having the garden, the natural dye garden. And I have one more antidote to share for everyone. Upstate in Hudson, there was this amazing group of people that started this company, Eco Tool Shed. And the Eco Tool Shed is this community tool shed, basically with tools of any sort that you can go borrow at any time. Shovels, drills, nails, hammers, anything you might need to just make your own project come to life. And it's been a great success. They've had a lot of great events around the Eco Tool Shed and how to build it, how to fix it, all these different programs. And they were like, okay, let's start a natural dye garden. This seems like a great extension of the Eco Tool Shed. And we scouted out the land around the tool shed, and it was full of toxins. It was actually a piece of land that was forgotten about near the railroad track. And it had all these heavy metals in the soil. And they were like, you know, kind of on the fence of whether or not to start the garden because it is a little bit toxic. And of course, with the presence of sunflowers or other plants that help rejuvenate the soil, you're able to like fix and heal the soil. But in the end, they decided like, we can't have the dye garden here, even though of course you're not eating the food, you still will be coming into contact with the soil. And so that whole project has been put on hold. And now we're looking for another like community space in Hudson, New York, that would be possible and viable for a natural dye garden. So I'm just curious also about with Woven, like what have you gone through to find the land? Are you going to have lots of different hubs that are going to have the natural dye gardens, or is it going to be in one place? Yeah, from my experience, I decided to just focus on my garden at home because we aren't able to find a space that isn't toxic or isn't owned by some private sector. So my garden at home has been great over the past 3 years. I have a big bed of madder root. The indigo has been extremely wonderful, but very challenging. I grew 3 different species, and the one that stuck, not surprisingly, was the Japanese indigo. It grows amazing in the New York area. The indigo seeds that I got from Mexico did not quite take. I also grew an indigo species from South America and one from Africa. And the one that really sung was the Japanese species. So going with that one, and now kind of looking for a few different farms upstate New York that would want to grow a larger crop of the indigo upstate and also the madder root. It's been about 3 years now, and it started out with just 10 plants, and now it's almost at like a 50 by 20 foot area that the madder root has taken over. It's a really amazing crop. If you're looking to start out with your dye garden, I would definitely recommend Weld, madder root, as they'll come back every year and they'll just keep growing and growing. And then the indigo, just start as early as possible. Bring the seedlings in from inside to outside, and you will be good to go.
That's amazing, Hannah. Thank you so much. Well, actually, maybe Elnaz can fill you in, and maybe Nat, who is the director of Hatch and the Woven Festival, who may be in the room, to talk to what we've started to do with regard to the growing of the plants, because we're at the beginning of the process. Well, we've been doing this iterations of this over the years, but I think for the harvesting for Woven 2023, I think we've just started posting things out, haven't we, Elnaz?
So where we're at, I've noted down your question about kind of where we're at with Dye Gardens. So we've got the overall call to action. So this is to everyone as well, if you've not already started, a call to action across Kirklees, which is to get everybody to plant their own dye garden. And what we have on our website is a load of different growing cards and growing resources to tell people what to plant when. So as Rowan said, this project's been going since 2019. So we have a few artists that have been involved with the project since then who've already got kind of established dye gardens. They mainly started like yourself, working with what they've got at home, so on their window ledge or in the balcony or in the garden, or whatever kind of space we have. We're really lucky in Kirklees because we have a lot of green space, a lot of parks, and because the council, we're funded through the council, part of the Arts Council England project is we've managed to secure places, so this might not be relevant, you might not mean anything to you, Hannah, but places like Crowness Park, where we've managed to secure a few sort of planter raised beds that we're going to start with. The other ones we've got is outside of libraries across Kirkburton. They've offered up some spaces. It's whether or not they would choose to be used by our artists. We have a lot of organisations getting involved that already have garden space, so perhaps it's outside their community organisation or centre where they've got raised beds. In Birkby, we're working with the Birkby and Fartown Gardening and Wellbeing Group, which was started through S2R. So S2R are called Support to Recovery, and they're involved with the project as well. We'll be doing a shout out to them on social media soon, I believe, as well. And they've started a garden, but they would like to get involved with Growing Colour Together. So it's a mixture of sort of allotment holders, organisations that already have space, but they're wanting to turn an element of their space, either their community space or their communal growing spaces, into a dye garden, or have a go at kind of popping in things for a dye garden. And a lot of people are already growing things on either allotments or other places, that like dahlias and cosmos and onions that they didn't even realise could be used for dyes. So there's that bit of knowledge and sharing in the general gardening community going on as well. And then we also have seed funding, which we have sent out, and Natalie's worked with schools across Kirklees to be able to support them with starting their school dye gardens as well, so that children can learn at like that kind of young level as well. I don't know if Nat just meant to message me. Yeah, and there's yeah, I didn't know if she'd mentioned another dye garden, but yeah, we've also got quite a few other people who are constantly submitting to our dye garden network. So we have a couple up there. I started one at the university during my study with researcher Kaylee Davies last year. So if you do have a dye garden and we haven't showcased it yet, we have a network which is on our project page, which you can submit to during your form, and we can showcase what you've planted or what you've started. So we're at that real early stage, but we're really encouraging kind of plant swaps, and we're encouraging people to start off their seedlings, share their knowledge, and just kind of like start to kind of think about how we can take this forward as an ongoing project, because as I get a lot of questions like, how are we supposed to grow everything by June? And it's not the point. The whole point is kind of we're trying to start this regenerative project that's ongoing and kind of a legacy for the area. So it's giving people that understanding of how to start something like this, or to create a bit of a movement. So yes, that's where we're at.
Hannah, it's so amazing. Well, both you and Cara are doing absolutely amazing things. And it's so interesting to hear your story in terms of how these things develop and evolve over actually, a period of time, because it is a kind of a slow process, isn't it? And it does take years to get to the point where you're really mobilizing that kind of innovation. But my goodness me, like, it's really important to reflect on being in the right environment, knowing that maybe the environment that you're in for innovation might not be the right one, so you have to move to it, finding the opportunities in new spaces and places. And also, I really love the way, I think for both of your practices, that there's something really, really important about honouring the good heritage practices that you might be drawing upon and thinking about how they can be sustained as practices in a contemporary, innovative kind of context. So I think that really came across with both of you, and the importance of some really good reciprocal knowledge exchange, I think, is the kind of the thing that gets the collaboration going, doesn't it? So it's so lovely. I think we should have some questions.
Yeah, I do too. Because I wanted to, I'm just going to go to gallery view just so that we've kind of got the audience at view as well. So hopefully everyone can see each other now. Yeah, I wanted to put a question to both of you really, which was basically about kind of what you see the role of the artist being when they're embedded within the community setting in this context. So I know you spoke a little bit about your workshops, both of you. So yeah, so kind of what that role is, and so what's your purpose of being in that kind of artist in that community setting, working with communities? And that's to both of you.
I guess I'll elaborate a little bit on that. I think it's such a great question, because I feel like there isn't one right answer to like what, you know, the artist is supposed to do in a community setting. I think, you know, like artist as teacher and like artist as facilitator can be really important I guess role that the artist needs to step into. I think like also like a lot with like public works, it's like the artist kind of causes conversation and like questions to be asked about like the role of the artwork. It really obviously depends on the artwork, right? Like, you know, there's a massive, I won't name the artist, but like huge graffiti sculpture in front of the new build next to my house right now. And like, is that doing anything for my neighborhood? I don't know. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think like, yeah, so it kind of it definitely depends on the context of the public artwork, but it's definitely like causing conversation, right? So I think, yeah, like that would be my thing. I think I also, you know, and I didn't touch on this in my talk, but something that I did find, and I'm sure like Hannah, you've also experienced this as well, that I wasn't really expecting when I started teaching, was that the majority of the like, pretty much I would say like 95% of when I teach a class, I get a comment or like a compliment, I would say, like from the participants saying how therapeutic the class was. So I think that there's also this amazing opportunity, I guess, for like art to kind of become like therapy. And especially like while you're working with like plants, it adds like a whole other medicinal layer to the equation, you know? And I think like, am I a doctor? Am I an herbalist? No. Am I going to go tell you that you should go heal yourselves and eat all the plants in your natural garden? Absolutely not. But I will say that like, I've noticed that even just like the act of making without necessarily there being this like value attached to I mean, of course there's value in it, but like, for example, like I like to always tell everyone, and when I'm teaching class, like, I'm not going to grade you. You're not going to get an A at the end of this. This is like your moment and your chance to kind of just like make without expectation. Has a lot of very therapeutic value. And I think without like there needing to be necessarily like a product at the end of it, and you're working with plants, like it just kind of feels like a no-brainer for me. So that would be, I think, something that's also something to think about as the role of the artist as therapist.
Yeah.
Unofficially.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. It is a therapeutic process. It's therapy for the maker, the creator, and then even someone to just see the textile. And I feel like natural dyeing has been like that for generations, for so long, even before the word artist was really invented, where natural dyes were used in ceremony and ritual for the earth, before commerce was even introduced to Central and South America. It was always for ritual, and dyes and plants were being used to honor the earth and give thanks for the earth for existing and holding and allowing us to be here. And so fast forward to modern day, like for a lot of my time as an artist, I was making one-of-a-kind pieces, cutting, dyeing, sewing, and creating for very specific occasions and people. I don't do that as much anymore because it is absolutely exhausting, because I really want to focus on education. But there was this one dress that I made for a wedding. It was a wonderful woman who was getting married. Her mother, her father, her sister were all involved in the making of the dress as well. So I held a 3-day dyeing workshop for the family to dye the dress together. They also dyed the dress for the mom and for the father. And then I cut and sewed everything for them. And that was such a process of just like cutting through the stress or, all these things you're making happen in your mind over a wedding or a big event, and just like dropping into the actual ritual and healing process of a union through the fabric. And it was such an amazing way to just connect the families together through the cloth, through the color, through the time that you're just spending together. And I feel like that for me is the role of the artist, to just cut through the bullshit, cut through the color of our skin, our economic class, our political beliefs. I mean, art is just a way to just get through all of that and be able to view the material and the beauty of just existing and being alive in this universe together.
Yeah, and there's something naturally, there's something really nice and natural just about connecting just through working with plants as well. So, working with the earth and, like, as you said, like honoring the earth and the colors that are created in certain parts of the world, and kind of how what that color means. Like, I think you said it in Cara in your presentation, that the color representing, that historic connection, it tells a story. Yeah, really cool. And I also think I've said it in the last one as well, that there's magic, there's alchemy, isn't there, in all of this, which brings something to the audience or the participants that you're working with. Ooh.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I don't actually focus a lot on online education. I would like to transition more into online, but my workshops usually run 5 to 6 hours, and they're usually consisting of a hike where we go find the plants, that we bring them back to the studio. I really see the value also in in real life, actual touching and using the plants.
Yeah. Amazing. So, Rowan, did you have a question? Did you want to ask?
Well, no, I think I already kind of mentioned. I think you were both talking to the idea of heritage cultures and where your influences come from, and how that's really important for the underlying ethos to drive you to do what you do. So I'm more interested in finding out from our artists who are currently doing residency with Woven and working with communities, if they've got anything they want to talk or ask you.
Yeah. Have we got any of our artists here? Oh, Nicola's there. And also community and artist questions. So I don't know, Lauren, if you've been pulling questions together, if you'd like to say any first, or if anyone would like to unmute, or we could go straight to Nicola. It looks like she's got a question.
It's actually a lot of people have raised the same thing, so I'm just going to throw that out quickly now to get that sorted. So Mordant, a few people have asked, with a community dye bath, what would you use, what you do use, if you could generally just give a general overview.
Who wants to take this one? You want to do it, Hannah? You want me to do it?
I mean, I'll share really quick specifically about the community dye bath. Basically, I was accepting, all natural fibers, but specifically like cotton. That was like the main one, or like a plant fiber. So my mordant process is wash in boiling water with some sort of pH neutral soap, Dr. Bronner's, and then do a tannin soak. In my process, I like to tannin soak overnight. I'll just let the plant fiber garments like sit in some sort of tannin soak. That can be walnut, that can be some sort of sumac mixture, that can be Tara, that can be gallnut. There's like so many different types of tannins, but I've found in like overall color, it's just best to do a little soak. And then alum sulfate, I like to use the potash alum. I boil that in. And that for me is a golden recipe for the plant fibers for the community dye bath. But you can do the tannin soak for like minimum 30 minutes as well. But I just always like to let things sit overnight. So that's my process.
You said sumac. Did you mean sumac as in the herb?
Yeah, so not technically the berries. The berries, the like red, like kind of red berries that can be used for culinary spices. They're amazing for natural dye, but for the tannin, I would just use the bark and the leaves, sticks from the sumac. It's a very high tannin content, and it's like a light gray undertone. And it grows everywhere in upstate New York. So right now I have like 20 garbage bins full of it, and I use that personally as a tannin soak. It's just everywhere, and it's just a light gray. But not the berries, because then you're getting into like color that's going to add in. Yeah.
Sorry, my head.
Oh, no worries. Go ahead, Cara. You can share if you're.
Yeah. With my like the dye baths that I did, I used indigo, which you don't actually need to have a mordant for. So that's kind of an easy community. I mean, it's not easy for yourself to set up your indigo vat, but it is something that I found is a nice process, because then it also encourages people to wait and take turns around the vat. I really only let like 2 to 3 people kind of enter the vat at a time, just so that they're like respecting it. And then when I was hosting the bundle dyeing class, we soaked our everything in a solution, like a mixed solution of iron sulfate and aluminum sulfate, and that created like a pretty light, fast solution for the eco printing. That's typically what people use. And if you were to also add like a tannin, like Hannah said, it might make the background a little bit darker, because when you mix tannin plus ferrous, it saddens the color and it makes it a lot like more gray, blue, green. But then I do also recommend using gloves for everyone who's doing the process. But yeah, mordanting itself is like its own baby of a process. I can like, there's some, I can in the chat, I can type in, there's a lot of really great free resources on like how to mordant, not to like plug Botanical Colors again, but they actually have like in a section on just like how to mordant everything and like what mordants to use. Soy, aluminum triformate, which is like a new cold water mordant, like the tannins, like there's an option for everyone. So people who are like anti using mineable rock salts can just do everything with, there's really like a recipe for everybody. So I can also pop that into the chat so everyone can
okay, great. Any useful links that anyone has, pop them in the chat, because we get a really good directory then.
Yeah, and actually Hannah, someone has asked if you could share the link of the school in Mexico. Possible, just in the chat, that would be great.
I will share it.
Shall I carry on running through the questions and things now? Yeah, okay. So looking down, I'm just going to say to anyone who wants to ask their question in person, do you want to turn your videos on, because then you'll come to the top of the screen. I can see who you are. If you don't do that, I'll assume you don't want to be shown. Jolly good. So Linda Hodgson was asking about SDC, Society of Dyers and Colorists, and if there was anyone from there here. If so, wave, make yourself known, say hello to Linda. And then leading on from that, someone was asking about just wanting to know more about fibre sheds. And I know, Nicola, you were asking as well about the kind of steps towards setting something like this up. So I don't know, Nicola, do you want to, shall I unmute you, and do you want to ask that directly? Cool.
Just to give a bit of context, Nicola is one of our Kirk Burton artists. She's a local artist for Kirk Burton, working with communities on the project.
So yes, so just that was super inspiring, and actually you kind of answered some of my questions when we were talking about the mordants and scouring. I was just kind of wondering about the practicalities of suggesting and implanting that as an idea in the community and how they might go about it. So it was just quite interesting hearing about that you do more daunting. You don't just kind of like keep it low level, I suppose. But I was just wondering as well, what tips you would have if we wanted to start and set something up like this. What would be kind of like, if you had one kind of pointer for it, what would it be?
To set up like a community dye bath, or yeah, I think like the main thing is to like keep it as low lift for yourself as the facilitator as possible. So kind of like when I offered 3 different types of dyeing at once, that was kind of insane for me to do, but I like to like pile things on my plate. So I would say like for your first one, maybe just stick with one. And just kind of like, yeah. And like, I think Hannah also really made just as clear, like you have to just tell people that they're going to get what they're going to get and to be happy with it. But if you say that from the get-go, people are usually okay.
Okay, good.
And you're always going to have one. There's always going to be that one person in the audience who is like, why am I not a master? And you just have to let them have their own feelings.
That's okay.
Managing expectations.
Yeah.
And also, I found having a little pre-class homework come pre-scoured. I think people can wash their garments beforehand. That can be a simple way to get the garments clean. Even if you're doing indigo, everything still also needs to be clean and scoured and washed. So that's one thing to be done. I've also been playing with the idea of people sending me their garments and I prepare them with the wash and the mordant, and then they arrive to the community dye bath and they're all prepared. But that also would take a little bit more money and time and effort. I know, money. No, Cara really like, I'm very inspired by Cara's. I got to charge more.
Do you charge for people to use them?
Yes.
Yes, it's definitely, I was charging last summer by weight. So I had this whole setup. It was at this cute cafe downtown Hudson. And every Saturday, people knew I was there 12 to 2. So the people would walk by like, oh, what are you doing? They'd be back next Saturday with like a bag of stuff. And I have my little scale, and I'm like, okay, well, let's weigh everything. It's by weight. It was like this cute little weigh setup. And people would start to understand, oh, I can't spend, this much. We're just going to choose one item, weigh it out, get it dyed. Okay. I think by weight is a good way. It can get complex. So maybe it's like a small garment, a medium, and a huge poncho. There could be like 3 sections of sizes of garments. But I think by weight would be the best.
I agree. I also, I think it's important to say like, no bedding. Someone will always bring a duvet. Always. There's always going to be the one person who brings their mattress to the event. And you're like, why did you think that was okay? But like, so yes, I think it's important to give like in big, bold letters, like the absolutely not. Okay. And someone will still bring one, but at least you said it and you covered your bases. But I will say just like a quick thing. I think like natural dyers are expected to do things for free. And I don't think that that's okay. I think we all have to like, profitability is not a bad thing. I think it's like actually like expanding abundance if you actually charge what you're worth. So I just want to put that out there because natural dyes are also very, 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 very expensive. And a lot of the time we forget to actually charge for the time that we talked about in the beginning that it takes to do this stuff. But like you can't operate at a deficit to give this to the community, right? So I do just want to like throw it out there that like it is really important. Yes, you can have like scalable price points and like, come up with ways to like give sponsorships for people and like figure out ways that are low cost to get people in. And that's why the indigo vat is great because it's like dip related, right? So like lighter colors, it's not going to take up like it stretches. But it is important to just be mindful that like these costs are costs for you too, and not to like forget that you also have to eat
in order to be able to have these offerings.
It makes it a real thing as well, doesn't it? So people realize that it doesn't just grow on trees.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to be taken seriously, and people will take more care of things if it's not just being given away. So
yeah, exactly.
Super tips. Thank you, both of you.
Cool. Looking down, no one's got the hand up, so I'm just going to jump on to the next one. There we go. Natalie was asking if we could hear from the audience about what kind of community and sustainable ideas have really resonated with them. And so instead of everyone kind of talking now, if you want to, I think via the Eventbrite, there's like a contact link that you could email things to, or I'll just pop my email in here as well, and that'll come through to me at the university, and I can forward anything on to Woven. Oh, we've got Natalie there. Okay. So do you want to,
just to give a bit of context to that. So I've been working on the Growing Colour Together project for quite a number of years, and I think as kind of Elnaz and the artists were saying, it is a slow developing project. And a lot of this has been about raising awareness so that people will want to become part of the project. Our intention, and everything comes down to being able to find funding and ways of working, is very much about being able to extend this as a longer term project, even into 2025 and beyond, and kind of have that legacy and embed community conversations around it. So I'm really keen to think about what is it that kind of, because we obviously, Nicola's thinking now about community dye baths. What are the things across the whole kind of series of talks that people are like, oh, wow, what if Kirklees did that? How amazing would that be? So I'm really interested in what is kind of connecting with people to think about, what our bigger projects or next projects might be, how Woven might even help support really small projects that people have gone, oh, I'd like to give that a little go, actually. How would we do that? Because we've got a bit more of an infrastructure to be able to kind of support communities to be able to do that side of things, or we can look to try and find funding to help people make more of Growing Together on their own terms, what they want to do. So I'm just really keen to hear what people, what's resonating with people, what's interesting for people that's coming out of the talks.
Yeah, and there's a few things that have come out already, comments from people. Natalie, there's a few comments here saying really interesting concepts, loved the community dye baths, linking with restaurants as well and local flower shops. Oh my God, so inspiring. Integrate with industry, so thinking about how we can use our industry partners and community dye project a bit more, because at the minute we're working at a very community local group level, but obviously we've got a few of our industry partners might be here, so again thinking about how we could link with them to talk a little bit more about some of the things that Cara mentioned. Actually, dye baths came up again, and someone said I really enjoyed the history. That was from your talk, Cara, and looking at the images of the dye house, an interesting behind the scenes tour. So yeah, Hannah, that was yours. So a few things coming up, but a bit more like that, a bit more feedback like that would be great, just to find out what's resonating with people.
Natalie, did you have any more comments that you wanted to bring up, or I wasn't sure, looking here on the No, I think we've kind of covered what was there now. I'll unmute you. There you go.
Sorry, I don't know why it keeps stopping me from being vocal. Everybody tries to. I don't know, because I also put something in there about young people as well. So I might, if it's worth just kind of going straight onto that.
Yeah, I think it looks like going down. There aren't a lot more particular questions, so if we can go on to that, and if anyone's got any burning questions, just pop your hand up or come direct to me.
Yeah, I suppose we try to embed a lot of the work that we do into younger people's education. So both of you, I think, have aspirations for that, and I think particularly, when we're thinking about fast fashion, we're thinking about fashion design, we're thinking about people going into textiles and they go, oh, I want to be a fashion designer. And I think that it's about how do we get the message to young people about being entrepreneurial and being sustainable. You know, I think a lot of people think, or young people think, well, there isn't any money in the industry, particularly when we're looking at more natural dyes. And so I suppose it's how do we frame that for the next generation?
I think it's a really good question. I'll speak on that for a moment. I taught at Rutgers University for 2 years before the pandemic, costume dyeing, fabric dyeing for costume tech, and the whole syllabus didn't have anything about natural dyeing. And so I was given the syllabus, here, this is what you're going to teach. And I was like, well, let's do half the year on natural dyeing and half the year on synthetics. And it took like a little pushback, but we made it happen. And we had a whole section about like the history of the natural dyes and use of them in different like aspects. Like, for example, the first black dress that was worn in a celebratory manner was Queen Elizabeth wearing this beautiful logwood dyed dress. And when I told the class that, they were like, oh my God, like what, natural dyes invented the first black dress at a party? Like, I feel like that whole history and just like these anecdotes and bringing it in to the class was one of their favorite parts of the class. And I still get messages from my students like about like questions, and they're diving in and like how to tell the story of the natural dyes, and specifically in like costume design. There is a lot of application and beauty in the history and the focus on the telling of the story. So that would be my idea, I guess, for the children and for the kids and for the youth, is to allow like space for that in our school systems and like pushing it more somehow, like opening portals in colleges. And yeah, so that was my experience with the youth.
Yeah.
I'm muted, sorry. I completely agree. I feel like, you know, when I went to college in London, as I was like saying earlier, and like in my dye lab, we had like a bucket of madder and a bucket of indigo. And I'll never forget this, but Margaret, like the amazing print tech, was just like, you'll never make money doing that. It was like, literally, it was like, there's just like, don't even bother. And I love a challenge. So like I came back the next year for my thesis year at Chelsea, and I was like, can I do my whole year on natural dyes? And they were like, if it's good, like we don't care, sure. And I just took over the dye lab, and it was nuts. And my poor roommates in my flat were like so pissed because I was like using squid. It was like so smelly. I didn't know what I was doing. And like I made things with coffee and berries, and I think if, you know, I like a challenge, but I think that there's a lot of students who would be really like, oh shoot, like get really like disheartened by that. So hopefully now I am seeing a shift in colleges, like Pratt here in Brooklyn is growing a natural dye garden as well. And I just realized I should connect you to, because like that's on a university level. And like my friend Gina is doing it up at RISD, and like it's starting to happen. And we're starting to create these like, you know, educational systems that like allow for the natural dyes. But I think it's also like going to high schools and telling, like explaining that like chemistry is cool and like chemistry makes color. Like if I had known when I was 14 that like color and chemistry are the same thing, I would have paid attention, you know, like I would have been excited, like kind of merging, like, yeah, like these like hybrid systems, like science and art, makes it more exciting and less like scary, you know. But then also from like the entrepreneurial like aspect, I think it's like, that's like one of the reasons why I haven't left New York City yet. Like it's kind of suicidal to like do what I'm doing in Manhattan, like in Brooklyn. It makes no sense, like from a financial perspective, but I just kind of believe that like plant people need to stay in cities. Like we have to help turn it around, you know?
Oh, you do. Thank you, Cara. Like,
no, it's hard. I'm like the last one here
Thank
doing
you.
it. I think like it's just like mildly insane, but I think at the same time, like there's like, you know, not being afraid to like approach businesses that might not have any idea about what the hell you're talking about. like I'm about to do like a collab with like a sneaker company, and they're like, this is dope, but they couldn't care less what I'm doing. They're like, it just looks cool. So it's like working in ways that like, just don't be afraid to pester people and network. I think like that's like a huge part of natural dyes. Is like when I started, this was like something like 13 years ago, people were like, ew, onion skins, it's disgusting. And now it's like one of the most like exciting thing, people are so into it. So it's just like not being afraid to get a couple of pushbacks and like faces, because it's like obviously like in our world we know what it is, but the truth is like out there, like tech people are like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So it's like just kind of not being afraid to like talk to people that might not actually understand what it is that we're doing, I think is a good way to like kind of start making those connections for the young ones as well.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like talking to the people who don't know about the potential probably gets you further than talking to people who are experts in the field of dyeing practices, right? I mean, yeah, it's nice to think about, yes, the potential of just taking it into different places and spaces to see how it might sit with an excited person. That's all you need, just a handful of excited enthusiasts, and and then it happens, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And on that note, I have had an email today from a student from a local college, Greenhead College, who's exploring natural dyes in the very early stages. She sent me pictures of her work, which I want to try and get woven to share. So we're sharing that kind of her early journey, but she's obviously inspired by this project. So yeah, we are reaching a wide range of voices here, which is great. So yeah, I can't thank you enough for your time this evening and your energy. It's been amazing.